there's a lot that needs to be done, and sometimes that can be disheartening. So I just want to start out by asking each of you, because something that I always said, after you learn about human trafficking, you see it everywhere. You see signs of it everywhere, and it could be anywhere. So I'll just start at that end and go down. Bethany, I want to ask you, if you were to wave a magic wand and everybody suddenly understood this crime, what do you think they would see walking around any neighborhood in Toronto, really? What do you think their eyes would be open to? What's the reality?
I just feel like how widespread this is and that it is everywhere.
That it is everywhere, and it is an around-the-clock business. And also, I think there'd be a lot more empathy and compassion as well when we're just walking past that person on the street and realizing that maybe there is more to this story and not just what exactly I'm seeing at surface.
Other than, I hope I don't get charged when the police came. Because at this point in the area that I was in, the police were just exhausted with what was going on. They didn't have the proper training. So being a prostitute and an addict, if you were assaulted and didn't get arrested, it was a good night. It was a good night. So I couldn't explain to the police officer. I had my own money in my back pocket. And he said, just go on your way and I better not see you for the rest of the evening. And ending that story, I'll tell you that one day it was about 12 o'clock in the afternoon and I was doing some grocery shopping on Queen Street. And I saw that same cab driver and he looked at me with a smirk and said, one day I will kill you. But being a prostitute, being a drug addict, I wasn't hurt. So that was the day that I realized that either I left the street or attempted to leave the street, or I was going to die on the street because I was becoming invisible. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story, Anne. The idea of being invisible is very powerful. And something that you had shared in the video, Jasmine, is like, if you see somebody getting punched in the head in the Eaton Center, like, do something, call 911. And Bethany, you had said in the video as well, like, sometimes it might just be making that 911 call. So in that regard, I mean, I was dumbfounded when you told me that somebody could get punched in the head in the middle of the Eaton Center and nobody would intervene. But Jasmine, perhaps you could expand on that and tell us, I would call that an obvious time that somebody should be calling the authorities, but what are maybe the more subtle signs that somebody might be in trouble next door or at your kid's school or maybe even your kid?
Yeah, thank you. So that's actually a true story. It happened to me. I'm also a survivor of human trafficking, and I was sitting in the Eaton Center having breakfast, like forcibly having breakfast with my trafficker. He used to force feed me, and he punched me in the head in front of the waitress. And there was a Toronto police officer sitting at the booth behind me, and the place was very, very busy. It was a brunch hour. It was not a seat to be had, and not one person even said anything. No one said a word. A few people grumbled amongst themselves, like, "Oh my God, look at what's happening over there." And that was that. And off I went for the rest of my beat up that day. And so I guess it's not so obvious. I can, most of my beat ups happened in public places and nobody ever said a word. Not one person ever said a single word. I walked through the Toronto Pearson Airport with my face looking like I stuck it in a beehive after a beat up, and nobody said a word, not customs, not the agent, nobody. So it should be obvious, but it's not so obvious. And I think some of the subtle things that people can look for are those who are quiet, who are looking down, who are remaining isolated, those who look like they've lost hope in their eyes. They're not necessarily loud and screaming for help. They've kind of given up on people helping them because they feel invisible. I think students' grades slipping, change of baseline characteristics, personality, I was once a very bubbly, happy, full of life, like naive young woman, and going through my own personal experience, I just completely gave up. I lost hope in everyone and everything. And I, going from like 80s and 90s in school to barely passing courses, failing courses, not showing up when I should have been in class, stuff like that. So, being absent from school, being absent from their friend group, disappearing, just slowly disappearing. Obviously we can see things on social media. You can see the change in the photos, the change in the, you can see the light disappearing from their eyes. I think for me, those are some of the main signs. Yeah.
So you have just named so many potential intervention points, people who could have intervened, the waiter, waitress, police officer sitting at the next table, customs, anybody in the airport, really, just asking you if you're okay, teachers, family members, friends. So when I was talking earlier about everybody has a role to play, I imagine it would have been quite meaningful to go from being invisible to being seen and just being told, asked, how are you? Can I help you? You also touched on the technology piece. And that's, Bethany, something I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned it in the video that human trafficking has been happening in the same way, really, for hundreds of years. But it's no longer necessarily meeting at ship ports or railroad stations. It might be bus station downtown Toronto, or more often, I don't know if it's more often than not, Nick, but online, especially with young kids. So Bethany, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that and the stories that you have heard about how these pimps, traffickers have been fun? Yeah, I think it was Jasmine, you had said to me, you wouldn't let your 10-year-old go to the mall by themselves, but if you're letting them on some of the social media stuff online, they're in 10 malls at once, and there could be a number of predators on there. So Nick, I know you've spoken with parents, school boards about this stuff. What do you tell parents to keep an eye out for? Because I think there's a lot of parents that would think, well, my child doesn't do drugs. They've got good grades. They're not vulnerable in that sense. This would never be an us issue. But of course, we know that it can impact anybody.
Yeah, I think the main thing is have those hard conversations with your kids. Have that open line of communication. Don't force it. You can't, if you force them to do it, they're just going to lie to you, and it's not going to work in your favor. But gain that trust with your children so that you can have those conversations. Who are you going out with tonight? So you know who they're going out with, what they're doing. They trust you and you trust them. You build that trust. You can't force that trust. And then you can and then they'll give you access to their phones and see what they're on. Their friend groups, they have their friends over. So you know who they're hanging out with, who these people are, things that they're doing and things that they're doing or going with, right? So it's have those hard conversations and build that trust with your children to know what they're doing. Because again, you're not going to know what they're doing on their phones. And there are so many different applications and everything now. But I find social media is one of the biggest recruitment tools for us. Absolutely now. And kind of knowing what they're doing on those devices is a big thing as well too.
Thank you. And when you see this happening on social media, is it the traditional boyfriend, girlfriend, hooking them with the charming lines, like you were saying? Is that typically how it's happening on social media? And is that how the grooming is happening?
I think kind of, Jasmine mentioned it as well too. These traffickers are so smart in the sense that they are listening to what these survivors and victims are vulnerable for, and then they're providing that for them. So they're able to kind of find that vulnerability and press on it. And it can be that romantic relationship. It can be a dependency, drug or alcohol. It can be even just friendship. Some people are just looking for companionship, whether it's romantic or just friendly. So
what does community do as a whole? Oh my God. Look at that scumbag, right? So I think in we just have to really look at people and wonder why they are that way. It's almost like looking at a kitten in a corner, a stray kitten. They're going to scratch and they're going to try to bite you, and you're not going to be able to pick them up. That's how we need to start seeing our people and start helping them. And in that sense, they're not going to be easy to pick up. They're not going to be easy to put your hand out. But what made them that way?
But okay, so who has questions here? Just to tell us what you would like. What's your wish that we are going to leave here with today? Because we could talk for hours.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us and for this question. I think this is also something that I'm very passionate about as well. I know that they've recently mandated that all teachers and administration are to be now trained in human trafficking. And I think by the end of this year, actually, this month, it has to be done. So that's one step. I know there are some agencies in school. I know in York region, they have, police are not allowed in the schools in York region, but they have allowed Bridge North to go in, which is another survivor founded organization. And so they are doing some education schools. I've done some presentations in schools like at the request of individual teachers. Sometimes we've had to do it outside of the school, but kids could opt in their parents' permission, and parents can join. We host in York region. We did a symposium for youth. In Durham region, they also had a symposium for youth. So we are there are efforts to get kids educated. Like I came from a small town, rural community. Really came here to go to university in London actually, and had no idea what human trafficking was or. And I think like my naivete and vulnerabilities were just like, I was a prime target for a trafficker. I have a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter. And so we do have these conversations at home as well. And we started with like healthy relationships and healthy boundaries and consent and a little bit of fear-based. Based on my life experience and my work. Probably like the picture perfect helicopter parent here. My kids hate me. You're so strict. We do online safety. If you want a device, you have to learn. We go through. I don't allow my kids to go places alone without parents. But a lot of education, and I've had women that I've worked with who've been trafficked from starting at 8 years old. Typically, those are familial trafficking, but so I think, like she said, we can't let the traffickers be 2 steps ahead. I wish that we didn't have our children growing up in a world like this where we have to have these conversations. I wish they could play Barbies and Legos and Hot Wheels and not have to talk about human trafficking at 8 years old. But unfortunately, that's not a reality. And so we need to have these conversations with our kids. And so I'm pro educating the kids. And I think like you said, providing the language to the parents. I know there's a lot of tools online. The Ontario government has them on the website. Thanks to Jen Richardson, actually, who's a survivor who was the head of the provincial anti-trafficking ministry in Parliament. And so she, I think the Trap is one of them. It's a great resource, gives parents some tools as well. Yes. Yeah. 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 So good. Trap tool, human trafficking. Yeah. Yeah. Another really great one is Aura Freedom. They have a hub and they have a ton of great things on their tools to teach children and have this conversation with children. And then I know that Durham Victim Services and Durham Police created a training as well. And One Child Network, amazing. They have groups, they have programming. In York region, we have Yippee, like youth and policing, and the Crime Stoppers that are working and doing the education. So
More comments. My name's Patricia, and I got involved in anti-human trafficking probably 15 or 16 years ago, and really involved for 10 years, and was involved with my ex-husband. We ran a safe house in Regent Park, and I'm just really impressed that, Anne, that you're working in the work that you're doing in the hospital as somebody with lived experience, and Jasmine, that you're running a house. Like, I think that you're both able to speak incredibly into the lives of the people, and build the relationships with the police that need to be there. So I'm just really excited all these years later to see this work happening. That nonprofit challenge has been around for decades because funding. It all boils down to funding. But I'm just really impressed, and I just want to really encourage you. And I know the work that Catherine and Bethany and everybody does is so incredible. And I hear what you're saying, Anne. So actually, my life now, I'm a supervisor in the shelter system, the city of Toronto, and it's a huge issue. And I really appreciate those comments because that really talks to central intake. And so those are opportunities for me to go back. And I don't work at central intake. We take referrals from street to homes, so encampments. We've had women who come in who are trafficked, and it becomes a learning opportunity for our staff. And I've had conversations with Catherine that one of my colleagues and I want to do some training in our shelter around human trafficking and intimate partner violence. And so probably going to have Catherine, maybe one of you will end up coming. But it's just so important to speak out. And but I'm just so encouraged that the work is still happening, but it's being facilitated by people who know what they're talking about, not those of us who think we know what we're talking about. And so I just want to really commend you on the work you're doing. And I also put a challenge out to the church community because I think the church community needs to respond differently and better and in a more timely manner. And I think that video was so great about what is your role, because we all have a role. And we also have to realize our role is because we want to be involved, and it's not about us. And so we may go 10 times to help somebody, maybe on the 11th time with somebody else, as you said, that they'll make it happen, but it's not about us. It's always, always about the other person. And so if somebody decides not to be engaged with us, so be it. That's their choice. It isn't because we went out and did it for them. We're there to help them because we want to. And so let's keep doing it. So just some really great comments I wanted to be